And that is why historians, when they write the story of Gautama Buddha, whose name was Siddhartha, they usually agree that it is difficult to establish that everything that we talk about him today, whether it is really the original story. And they do put this idea of a legend. Again, it's not wrong. Always saying, if the legend shows that there were changes, then I don't know whether the teachings also changed. Judaism, there are 39 books in the what is called the Old Testament. 20 different authors living at vastly different periods of history. Some writings appear mythological, while others are accurately historical. Now, this is my own opinion. And so, I could not classify, because 39 books, how do you make one classification? So I left it unclassified. If any of you are able to classify those into any one type in these four, you can go ahead and come up to me and tell me, and it'll be a part of my presentations after that. Islam, the Quran was put together in writing by 652 CE. CE is Common Era, the same as AD. Within 30 years of Muhammad's life, only some changes in the text are accepted by scholars. I'm being very liberal here, because actually in the reign of one of the caliphs, whose name was Uthman, Ali, the next caliph, had said that Uthman was dealing with a Quran that was corrupted. So Uthman immediately said, no, that won't be right. And so he called the scholars together and said, get the authentic Quran. Go around and find out which is really what Muhammad said and did. And so they did that and brought together what we have today as the present Quran, but unfortunately they wiped off every other manuscript. So we don't know whether what we have today. So I'm just being liberal, but at the same time we recognize it in the same lifetime. Hard to form a legend in the same lifetime. When it comes to Christianity, the earliest manuscript is about 114 to 134 AD. It's in England, kept in the John Rylands Library. The original manuscripts, the copies, were within 20 to 50 years of the life of Jesus. Do you know which are the earliest writings of the New Testament? They're not the Gospels. They're the letters of Paul. And the way he has described certain events, when we look back at the history by Luke, who wrote that and put that together, some of those writings were within 15 years of the life of Jesus. Now, Paul got his ideas not by himself originally. The story part he got from the disciples of Jesus. So obviously the story had been gelled even before that. In other words, for this literature, there's practically no gap between the actual story and the gelling of the story that took place, which we have today in the New Testament. It's confined to one generation, there are no core changes. We can already say emphatically there is no longer any solid basis for dating any book of the New Testament after AD 80. That's Sir William Albright. He is acknowledged as one of the greatest archaeologists in the world. Now, what I did was, we acknowledge and accept books today in libraries of the universities as historical writings. Nobody questions them at all. For instance, Caesar's Gallic Wars or Gallic Wars. But look when it was written, 100 BC it was written, and the earliest manuscript we have of that event is dated 900 AD. There's a gap of 1,000 years in which we don't know what was in the writing. And still we accept it clearly as historical. Nobody questions it. Same with Herodotus' history. It was written in 400 BC. Earliest manuscript we have in our hands is 900 AD. A gap of 1,300 years. And still we accept it as historical. Tacitus' Annals, 1,000 years is the gap. When it comes to the New Testament, I compared that because that was looking like in front. The New Testament, the gap is only 20 to 50 years, in fact less than that. In one attribute, in one concept, we really cannot call the New Testament as mythological or legendary. It was just too early. If we can swallow 1,000 years, we should be fair enough to grant 20 years to 50 years. The second concept of credibility to a writing, to say that it might be historical in which the changes did not really occur in a major way, is the number of manuscripts. If there are a few manuscripts in the same town, for instance, then a person can go to each of them and change it at a place and nobody will know it's changed and we've changed the manuscript. It's corrupted. If there are many, many manuscripts, it's hard to go to all of them and make the same changes. The people will know that it's being changed and they'll get back and say, wait a minute. Something is happening here, let's purify it. So the greater the number of manuscripts, the more difficult to make the changes. And if those number of manuscripts are saying about the same thing, it is difficult to challenge the mainstream story of that writing. Let's compare that now. Caesar's Gallic Wars is based on 10 manuscripts worldwide. Herodotus' history is based on 8 manuscripts worldwide. Tacitus' Annals is based on 20. The champion there among the Greek literatures is Homer's Iliad. Homer's Iliad is based on 643 manuscripts. Is that impressive compared to this? Yeah. So now suppose I tell you that the New Testament is based on 665, would you say, wow? I'm not pushing you into any direction. I'm just going to throw out the real number that the scholars have actually counted. The New Testament is based on 5,664 Greek manuscripts. If you add the Latin and the Arabic and the rest of them, do you know the number? It is 24,900. Compare that with 10, which everybody says is a historical piece of writing. If you are going to say 10 and 20 and 600 allows you to say that it's historical, then I believe 5,000 should clearly classify this writing as a historical piece of writing. Now that does not mean you cannot challenge it. You can challenge it, but you cannot challenge it as a mythological writing and class it with all the other myths. No. You can challenge it much like, the present day challenge, even now going on, as to really how did John F. Kennedy die in Dallas in 1963? All kinds of stories, but they're all historical. They do clash, but nobody ever, because of that clash, calls JFK a mythological figure and a mythological story. So similarly, if we find something that we can't really swallow quickly in a historical piece of literature, then honesty and fairness demands that we don't throw it off like a mythological writing, but examine it. Are you with me? The facts and the evidences do not allow us to call the New Testament as a mythological or a legendary piece of writing. That's the main point. In real terms, the New Testament is easily the best attested ancient writing in terms of sheer number of documents, the time span between the events in the document, and the variety of documents available to sustain or contradict it. There is nothing in ancient manuscript evidence to match such textual availability and integrity. No other ancient book has anything like such early and plentiful testimony to its text, and no unbiased scholar would deny that the text that has come down to us is substantially sound. In the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone among ancient prose writings. Not ancient religious prose writings, among all ancient prose writings. Indian, Chinese, Greek, Romans, all. Put them all together. The New Testament is the most backed scripture or writing in the world. And so, to be skeptical of the resultant text of the New Testament books is to allow all of classical antiquity to slip into obscurity, for no document of the ancient period are as well attested bibliographically as the New Testament. The Quran and the New Testament are definitely historical in nature, with the New Testament having a very high credibility and integrity of text. Now, I've heard lots of people saying, so many changes, how do we know? That is true. There are many changes. But look, if you're going to say there are many changes and so the credibility of this is in question, you will have to question every other ancient writing in the world today. And be fair about it. Are you with me? Okay? These are the evidences and the facts on which we can base a certain conclusion. You don't have to, but at least accept that these are not personal opinion, these are numbers. The challenge to test and see. Any questions? You can write them out. Challenge to test and see. Did that literature throw out a challenge and say, well, here I am, test me out? In Hinduism, we have to accept it as it is, otherwise there is no point in trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita and its speaker, Lord Krishna. The Hindu literature does not throw out a challenge to test. It just says, here it is, you can take it or you can leave it aside. Buddhism, the genuine realization of the emptiness of the phenomenon world is a direct intuition of the highest truth. Absolute truth is unconditional, undeterminate, and beyond thought and word. Once again, clearly stating that we are unable to actually grapple with it. We either take it or we leave it aside. You cannot test it by any means, except experience. And both these religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, say the test is the experience of it. For me, and that's my search, the question of why should I test this and not that? Give me a reason for testing. And if you don't give me a reason, then let me look at something, some other one that gives me a reason for testing. I'm not dismissing it. I'm just saying you put the cart before the horse if you say first test it out. And if you have to test it out, you have to get into the experience of it. And here are other religions telling me if you ever go and experience that one, you are out for the count. So give me a reason. So those two don't allow us to really test it except by personal experience. Islam does throw out a challenge. It says, produce one chapter comparable to it, the Quran. Call upon your idols to assist you if what you say is true. But if you fail, as you are sure to fail, in other words, the Quran writing is of such a nature that nobody else can equal it. And so the challenge is, can anybody produce writing that is comparable to it? There are 3 or 4 verses in the Quran which throw out a challenge. Produce a book, or produce a chapter, or even produce a verse that is comparable to the Quran. I took up the challenge and I said, okay, let me try to do what they are saying because it's a challenge, and honestly, go and see if you can get it done.